All right, let's jump into a real diplomatic puzzle here. We're talking about a sudden, super public spat between two countries that are, supposed to be friends. So, what in the world is going on between India and Poland? And boom, this was the shot fired. An incredibly sharp, very public warning from India's top diplomat, Jaishankar, and it was aimed squarely at his Polish counterpart on January 19th, 2026. Now, this is not the kind of language you usually hear between friendly countries. I mean, it's direct, it's accusatory, it definitely set off some alarm bells. Okay, and this is where the story gets kind of weird, right? Because just a few months before this whole public blow-up, the leaders from both countries were literally in Warsaw celebrating a brand new strategic partnership. They were promising to get closer on everything: politics, economics, security. So yeah, they were supposed to be getting closer, not throwing punches in public. So, what we've got here is a classic diplomatic mystery. On one hand, you've got this public declaration of friendship, and on the other, this really sharp disagreement. So let's do this. Let's peel back the layers and figure out what actually caused this breakdown. All right, so first things first, we have to look at the immediate trigger. I mean, what one thing could possibly make a major world power call out a key European nation so bluntly? Well, it turns out the trigger wasn't some secret, shady backroom deal. Nope. It was a very public, very high-level diplomatic visit by Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski to Islamabad, Pakistan. And this is where we get to the heart of the issue. During that visit, Poland and Pakistan put out a joint statement. And in that statement, they used the phrase Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Now, for India, any mention of Kashmir by a third party, especially when they're standing next to Pakistan, well, that's a huge diplomatic red line. You just don't cross it. You see, New Delhi's policy for decades has been super clear. Kashmir is a bilateral issue. Period. It's something to be worked out between India and Pakistan, and nobody else. So by putting that phrase in an official document, Poland, at least from India's point of view, just walked right over a very clear, very sensitive boundary. But you gotta understand, for India, this isn't just about fancy diplomatic words or, protocol. Not at all. It's about connecting that one specific phrase, the Kashmir dispute, to a massive core national security threat. So when Jaishankar uses those heavy words, cross-border terrorism and terrorist infrastructure, he's not just talking in generalities. He is drawing a direct line from Poland's diplomatic statement on Kashmir to India's long-running accusation that Pakistan is the source of terrorism in the region. He's basically saying, you're wading into dangerous waters here. But is this whole thing really just about one diplomatic statement? Well, it's easy to think that, but that's really only half the story. It turns out this wasn't just a one-way street. Poland had its own pretty serious list of complaints about India. And that's where this story gets a really fascinating plot twist. Yeah, this was basically a diplomatic tit-for-tat. Both countries felt like the other one was just completely ignoring their most important security concerns. So while India's over here focused on Kashmir and terrorism, Poland is pointing its finger right back. They're talking about India taking part in Russian military drills, which they called threatening. And on top of that, Poland was really unhappy about India buying Russian oil. In fact, Minister Sikorski didn't mince words. He flat out called it financing the war machine of Putin. Wow. And to really get where Poland is coming from, you just have to look at a map. Seriously. They're a frontline NATO country, and they share a border with Ukraine. So for Warsaw, any action that even looks like it's supporting Russia isn't just some abstract foreign policy decision. No, it feels like a direct threat to their own national security. Okay, so to really understand why India's reaction was so strong, we need to zoom out a bit. Because this isn't just about this one incident with Poland. It's actually rooted in India's decades-long and, frankly, super frustrating battle at the United Nations over one seemingly simple question. What is terrorism? I mean, this has been a huge deal for India for a very long time. We're talking way back in 1996, India proposed this global treaty, the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, or CCIT for short. And yet, here we are all these years later, and that treaty is still completely deadlocked. And the goal of this CCIT thing? It actually sounds pretty simple, right? Just create one universal, legally binding definition of terrorism for the whole world. The whole point is to make sure there are zero loopholes, no safe places for terrorists to hide, and absolutely no excuses. Basically, the idea is that terrorism is terrorism, period, no matter what the supposed cause is.
So, why the deadlock? Well, it all comes down to this one major disagreement. Some countries, Pakistan included, have argued for an exception for what they call legitimate struggles for self-determination. But India? India absolutely rejects this. They argue that a loophole like that is a recipe for disaster, that it could be used to justify all sorts of attacks on civilians, including in Kashmir. And that right there, that's the global backdrop for why Jaishankar's comments were so sharp. Okay, so let's bring it all together. What does this one kind of random feud between India and Poland really tell us about the bigger picture? About where the world is headed today? The takeaways here are actually pretty clear. This whole incident is like a snapshot of the world right now. It shows us a world where even so-called strategic partners can have these really sharp public fights. The war in Ukraine is forcing everybody to do these difficult balancing acts. And these old nagging issues, like how we define terrorism, are still causing huge divisions. That old era of simple us versus them alliances, it's pretty much over. And that really leaves us with one last big provocative question, doesn't it? If your strategic partner on one side of the world is seen as hurting your biggest security interests, while at the same time you're seen as hurting theirs, then what does that partnership even mean? It's a really tough question, and it's one that leaders not just in New Delhi and Warsaw, but in capitals all over the globe are having to wrestle with right now.